Good morning. You're listening to Spectrum on 105.9 WJZW, Woodbridge, Washington. I'm Thomas Grooms, and joining us in studio this morning, a real treat, band leader, performer, and songwriter, Washington, D.C. legend, the Godfather of Go-Go. Mr. Chuck Brown is with us, and this morning our focus will be a very special benefit, which is taking place October 27th at the State Theater in Falls Church, entitled Hell or High Water. It's a fundraiser for Gulf Coast musicians displaced by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and it features Chuck Brown, the Nighthawks, the Buck Hill Quartet, Big Joe and the Dynaflows, the Soul Crackers, Tom Principato, and a whole lot more. But without further ado, Chuck, good morning and welcome to Spectrum.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here.
Great to see you. It's early in the morning, you know, it's 6 a.m., so I guess I could say, wake me up before you go-go. But that's really a bad joke, but
Not
as
really.
I said coming on the air, you're the Godfather of Go-Go, and this is a culture that has a long history. I can think back, I guess Stephen Stills was in town last week, and his first band was called the Go-Go Singers, and they were meshing the folk music and the rock music back in the late 50s into the 60s, and of course we had the beatnik era going on there, Oscar Brown Jr., very prominent during that time. Odetta, of course, was a catalyst for folk music turning into rock, and of course when Bob Dylan went electric. But during the 60s we had discotheques called Go-Go's. Goldie Hawn was a go-go girl on Laugh-In. Smokey Robinson told us about it because he was going to a go-go.
Right.
But can you tell us about it? Because you're the Godfather of go-go.
Well, you know, they had go-go girls, go-go clubs, you know. Like I said, Smokey Robinson came out in the 60s with Going to the Go-Go. So, but we didn't have no go-go music, so we decided to put together some go-go music, and it worked.
But there's a formula to it. There's a science with the beat that you use.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a spiritual thing. The beat itself come out of the church. I used to go to, my mother kept me in church when I was a kid. And the church that I went to, they had this little band, sort of like a marching band. One man played the bass drum, another man played the snare, and another man played the cymbals. And then you had some percussions in between there, and it all mixed in together, and they were singing these beautiful gospel songs with the up-tempo, and the people was jumping and shouting to the beat. And that same beat, Grover Washington came out with on Mr. Magic, and I recognized it. And
I was going to say that.
I decided to adopt it and try to see what we could do with that beat, you know what I'm saying? There's a spiritual feel to it. We slowed it down, and broke the top 40s down. We were doing top 40. We'd break them down in between and put that groove in there, and it began to catch on.
And I mentioned to you, we have a mutual friend, Barry Richards, who started me in radio, and you were part of that scene also back in the early, I guess, mid-'60s,
right,
with the Soul Searchers. And, of course, you also had the honor and distinction working, I guess, recording with the Iceman, Jerry Butler.
Yeah, I love working with him.
What was that experience like?
It was great. He was the first major artist that I ever worked with. Matter of fact, it was just one night, you know. We was at the Shelter Room over in Southeast Washington, D.C., and Gene Chandler and Jerry Butler and Tommy Hunt, Tyrone Davis, all of them used to come through, you know. And we had the pleasure of playing behind them. And Jerry Butler was singing Your Precious Love, and that was a very easy tune to play. I've been singing it since he was first came out with it back in 1957.
Wow.
And but I wasn't playing any music at that time. But this was in '66 when I had the opportunity to play with him.
I was going to say, Your Precious Love is definitely the #1 soul ballad. You know, I see Peebo Bryson late at night hawking those soul ballad classic records along with Patti LaBelle.
Right.
And it's always When a Man Loves a Woman, but you know, the Iceman was on the scene before that.
Yes.
And speaking of Tyrone Davis, I mean, we're turning back the hands of time right now, just reminiscing about all this. But you saw it all evolve. I mean, disco was dying in the 1970s. I was doing progressive rock on another radio station, but you were out there cutting edge, looking for new music, and you found it. And of course, you, I guess, took the go-go beat a little bit further than it had been taken before. And then this evolved into what, hip-hop and rap music in the next decade?
Absolutely. Disco was hot at the time. I was trying to get the go-go groove to catch on. And from 1972, we put out a record called We the People. And the next record was Blow Your Whistle, Going to the Go-Go, and Blow Your Whistle, Shake a Tambourine. You remember that one? Anyway, after that, we put out another tune called Salt of the Earth, another album, rather, called Salt of the Earth. And then we had been working on Bustin' Loose for about 2 years before we recorded it. And we recorded it in 1977, and it came out in 78. We had also recorded quite a few other tunes before that was never released. I guess they weren't good enough, the company didn't appreciate them that much, We had quite a few flops in between there. So it took about maybe 5-6 years to get that one together.
You're listening to Spectrum on 105.9 WJZW. If you just joined us in studio with us, the legendary Chuck Brown, the Godfather of Go-Go, and our focus this morning, his illustrious career for spanning almost 4 decades. And we're also talking about a very special event that's taking place October 27th. We're inviting everyone from Maryland, Virginia, and the district to come on out to the beautiful State Theater in Falls Church as we raise money for the musicians who are displaced by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita along the Gulf Coast. And the Nighthawks will be in the house. Pete Ragusa sends his regards, by the way. He was out with Hubert Sumlin, Howlin' Wolf's guitar player, doing something, and he wanted to come in, but he said, please tell Chuck I said hello. Buck Hill Quartet will be with you. There's another Washington legend.
Yes.
Buck's been around a long time. You've worked with him?
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I know him.
And I also want to remind you that in the 90s, we broke musical ground here in the Alexandria area when Mick Fleetwood came to town and opened up his club.
Yeah.
You were on the scene there. I was on the scene there. And, of course, a lady that we all still think about today, Eva Cassidy. You collaborated with her.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell us the story, how you actually discovered her. It was either you or Jim Vance.
Well, no, I was working with a young man, Chris Biondo. I was working in the studio, and we were doing some, cutting some tracks. And after we finished cutting that day, he told me that he wanted me to listen to something before I leave. So he put on this track, and this beautiful mellow voice was coming out of this track, and I asked him who it was, and I told him right away I would like to do a record with her. And he said, okay, well, we can get that together. I think she would like to do one with you, too, because she was one of my fans, he said. So anyway, we got together about a couple of weeks later, and I met her, and she was such a nice, sweet lady, and we got together and collaborated on a couple of tunes that we wanted to do. So we did, I guess about 3 tunes, and then one of them didn't come out right away. But anyway, when it got it all together, we put out a whole album, and it was called The Other Side. And that was the greatest thing that happened to me at that point in time, because reminiscing back in the days of Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Billy Eckstine, Sylvan, they used to sing duets together. And I always wanted to do a duet with a lady, and she was right on time.
And she was quite a lady. She could sound like Aretha Franklin, and she could sound like Hillbilly also, if you wanted to. It was incredible.
Absolutely. She had her own style. So the album came out pretty well.
Chuck, as you look back over your career, what were some of the most memorable moments that you shared on stage?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I tell you, I played so many great gigs with so many great people. We played Den Haag, Holland. That was in the middle 80s, around 87. We played all over Europe. But Den Haag, Holland was one of the most memorable gigs away from home. About more than 500,000 people and more than 200 acts on the show. And the festival lasted like 6 days. But we only played 3 days. But it was just, it was a thrill to be out there to meet so many big artists like James Brown and Nancy Wilson and Curtis Mayfield and Miles Davis, and we came on between Curtis Mayfield and James Brown. And James Brown and I had pleasure working together before in many, well, not a lot of gigs, but I would say about 7 gigs over the past 30 years or so. And that was one of the most memorable shows. But here at home, the most memorable show I think I've done. There more than one, because the Monument Grounds, and everybody get to together on the family community thing, family day down on the mall, and then we got, I did my birthday at the 930 Club, and that was the most memorable gig that I've done in years.
God bless Seth Hurwitz.
Yeah, we played 2.5 hours, and it was like the best birthday party that I've ever had.
He runs a great club. I gave him his first job in radio when he was 14. He also brought Jimmy Smith to town. He's brought Herbie Hancock to town. He keeps the music vibrant and alive here in Washington, as well as all the other promoters, Blues Alley, the Birchmere, and all the fine clubs around town. But you do your part. So I wanted to ask you, the Washington music scene, we have a legacy here. You also do straight ahead jazz. You cover Ellington's tunes. I mean, this cat does everything from Family Affair to Autumn Leaves, don't you?
Yeah, I try, you know.
But let's talk about the music scene. And we're going to get you to play disc jockey. If you would play a little smooth jazz this morning, I wanted to hip you to the fact that we have an artist by the name of Richard Elliott, who used to be in Tower of Power, and he does People Make the World Go Round, and of course, you cover that tune.
Yes, one of my favorites.
But let's get back to the Washington music scene. How is it doing today in 2005?
Well, Washington, D.C. is the most incredible, stabilized. I mean, we have the most loyal fans than anybody anywhere in the world. I mean, Washington, the fans are never going to let you down. If you play in different cities, you'll find some of them there. If you play over in Europe, some of them will be there. It's just, there's no other place like it. You know, we leave home, we play around the country, but we want to come back to D.C. as soon as possible. Never like to stay on the road too long.
But we do have a music scene here.
Yes,
I mean,
definitely.
even though it's a political city, music does thrive. Even Bill Clinton was playing down there at Fleetwood's, or his brother was down there playing sax, and Bill came down for the release, for the record release party, if you recall. Guys like Mike Schreibman do a lot in the Washington area with the Washington Area Music Association, and you've been awarded, I guess, how many Whammys?
Oh, I can't count. I cannot count them. I have a room full of them.
When you go back to the 1950s, Glen Echo Park, you know, the Milk Ranch show, when music was just getting integrated, we were talking about Barry Richards and Bobby Bennett, Bob Terry, all those cats that really were pioneers and don't get the credit that is due, because they did a lot to push rhythm and blues music, and the next thing you know, we had Ween playing black and white music because of their efforts. And, you know, that does go unnoticed, and I think they do deserve credit, and I just wanted to mention that this morning. But going back to the 60s, like I saw Hendrix at the old Ambassador Theater when things started to get psychedelic. But what were you doing during that time? The band, the Soul Searchers, didn't just come out of nowhere. You had to start with an early band.
Well, you know, back during the early 60s, you know, I was working every day. I was driving truck. I was a bricklayer and trying to get my band together at the same time. When I was playing with other bands, you know, I was learning a lot, and it was a great inspiration to me to be able to get my own band together. And that was back in 1966 when I formed my own band. But all during that time, I was inspired by everybody. I mean, everything that come on the radio, I try to learn. You know, if it was a top number 1 or number 10 tune in the top 10, I would try to learn it. And whenever I could play, I would play with anybody that I could play. But the only two bands that really gave me good experience was the Earls of Rhythm and the Los Latinos. And when I left those bands, I had formed my own band.
A lot of the cats from the Soul Searchers went on to bigger and better things.
Absolutely. But see, when I formed the Soul Searchers, I was looking for some guys with some soul, you know, and I didn't particularly care about what type of music that we played at that time. I was trying to play it all, you know. I was trying to play Latin with the African groove, and then I was trying to play blues and the top 40 off the radio. And I found some guys that could do that. So I named the group the Soul Searchers. But actually, I was a soul searcher, searching for some guys with some soul, you know. But the people put my name out front, the fans did over the years, you know. And from that time on, as far as playing with other bands, and you know, we all have exchanged ideas from other bands around the city. Other bands are inspired by us, and we are inspired by other bands. we all have ideas that we would like to, just like this band might have some ideas that I would like to use. And it's not, back in those days, they was calling it biting, You're biting off the other bands. Well, we bit off the radio, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I was honored for somebody to bite off of me, If I come out with a new sound and somebody grabbed it, I was on it. I wasn't taking back on it like, I didn't have no attitude about it. Like some guys say, he's playing my song, But to me, it was an honor, And that's how Go-Go caught on.
Well, I tell you, it'll be an honor to see you on the 27th at the State Theater, and what you're doing for the displaced musicians in New Orleans is going above and beyond duty. And speaking of the local Washington music scene, what a lineup. Of course, you're headlining it, but our good friends the Nighthawks will be there, and they've been keeping the blues alive since I played Keep
wonderful.
Cool when they were on Aladdin Records when I was at another radio station, and Mark Winter brought that up, I guess, in 74, 73, somewhere in there. The Buck Hill Quartet, who we mentioned, Tom Principato, who was a great guitarist and was with the band Powerhouse, you might remember. And they used to do a lot of Bull Moose Jackson tunes.
Right. He's one of my favorite, Bull Moose Jackson.
And speaking of the Soul Searchers, they won't be there, but the Soul Crackers are in the house.
How about that?
And they do a tribute to the legendary band from Woodstock, New York, Levon Helm and the band. And, of course, they have ties to New Orleans with Alan Toussaint arranging all their horn arrangements back in the early 70s. But what about your ties to New Orleans? You've been to New Orleans.
Yes. We played that Essence Festival down there, and before then I'd been there several other times. When we had Buster Loose out, we went there about 3 times. Played at the Fox's Theater, I believe it was. We played in Baton Rouge, down in the swamps, and this great big, it looked like a barn, but it was just so much water in there, and the people, about 1,600 people in there, and the water was about half a foot high, and I couldn't believe what I saw. They never stopped dancing, and I never seen anything like that before. Then we played at the, what is that place we played the last time we were there?
Tipitina's?
I believe it. What was that?
Tipitina's, I guess.
Tipitina's.
Professor Longhair played there a lot. Professor Longhair played there. Huey Piano Smith played there.
Yeah, it was a few years back we played there.
Fats Domino still alive and well.
Yeah.
In New Orleans.
Yeah, we opened up for him too, on a couple of shows there. One was in Denver, I believe, Denver, Colorado, and one was in Richmond, Virginia. That was quite a few years back.
And flashing back to the mid-'60s, of course, Aaron Neville came out with Tell It Like It Is.
Yes.
And the whole face of radio changed with that tune.
Yes, it sure
still
did.
stands the test of time today.
I believe that was in '67, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, you're standing the test of time, and we can give people proof of that if they can log on to smoothjazz1059.com or your website at...
Yeah, www.winemeupchuck.com.
All right, www.winemeupchuck.com. Or you can call 1-800-779-1059 if you have questions about the October 27th benefit fundraiser for the displaced musicians along the Gulf Coast. Or you can call the State Theater, and their number is 703-237-0300. You're listening to Spectrum on 105.9 WJZW. In studio with us this morning, the legendary Godfather of Go-Go, Chuck Brown's here, and our focus, his career and the October 27th benefit at the State Theater in Falls Church, a fundraiser for Gulf Coast musicians displaced by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Well, we talked about the Washington, D.C. music scene. You've traveled to New York. You're back and forth. You vacillate back and forth. What's going on in New York in the Big Apple?
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of fun. We go to New York. We played at, last time we played at Jackie Robinson's Park. And years back, I played at the Apollo Theater, and we played at Small's Paradise, and we played at the Steve's Club. What's the name of Steve's Club? Tramps. Anyway, we played all over New York. We played Brooklyn, Harlem, Manhattan,
The short time that Mick Fleetwood had his club in Old Town Alexandria, I know you have many fond memories.
Yes.
I saw you many nights there.
Yeah.
Didn't you enjoy that club?
Absolutely. And Fleetwood, man, he's a very talented man. I've been watching him for years, And he seemed to have the same band and the same sound, the same ingredients. I'm sorry the club closed down, didn't it? Or he moved somewhere else?
He sat in with you, didn't he?
Yes, he sure did.
Yeah, it closed down in 1996, and we had one big party because the sheriff of Falls Church came down and drank the place dry because John Van Horn was the deputy sheriff. He used to be in Link Ray's band back in the day, and we put a band together called the John Van Horn All-Stars. Anton Fig came down from the Letterman show, and Mick Fleetwood and Anton did a drum battle. I have it on video at home. You have to come over and see it.
Oh, that should be fun.
But we also have you and Eva playing down there on many nights. And he used to have, you know, like it was like back in the old days, like open mic night. You'd go down there and play, and it was just so much fun. And that's really what music is all about, isn't it? That goes back to the roots. How do you think MTV affected the recording business in 1980? Because you were right at your, I'd say, your peak.
Well, I think it did a tremendous job in terms of making people more famous and you know, the audience more famous and more exposure. You could see what you're hearing, you know, on MTV. I think it's great.
Well, you know, we see you a lot on BET specials. It's very educational to see these shows. But for some reason, jazz has always stood on its own. And as we think about New Orleans, Louis Armstrong, New Orleans is where jazz music came from. After the storm, was there a lot of destruction? I guess, of course, there was a lot of destruction. But what about some of the musical instruments in New Orleans? Did we lose a lot of stuff? Do you know, are you getting any reports on the museums?
Yes, we lost an awful lot of stuff. And that's why one of the reasons we want to do this show for the musicians that were lost, and some of them have been totally misplaced. And I think it's a good thing for. I think if everybody would get together and do something like that, it would help inspiration. It would encourage them to go on. And some of the guys gave up. A couple of friends of mine that used to play, they're up here now. And told me, say, man, I don't feel like playing anymore, you know. So he want to play no more. He used to play 5-6 nights a week in New Orleans. And it was sad to hear that. They don't want to play anymore. So I invite him over to the show that we're doing over at the State Theater.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll see him then, get a chance to talk to him some more and see how he's feeling. He was very depressed.
Sure.
And he told me that, man, I'm not the only one that's feeling this way, you know. And as a matter of fact, he'll probably sit in with us.
Wow. Well, people were evacuated, as we know, and of course they're all over the country, so it's kind of hard to get your band together or get your schedule together. And thinking of the D.C. Armory as one of the shelters, I saw a lot of bands there back in the day in the D.C. Armory, the old Washington Coliseum. I saw the Rolling Stones, and 65, Patti LaBelle opened up with the Bluebells. And it was an all-day affair, you know, for $5 you saw so many bands. And those were the days, but
it was cheap
many musicians.
It was very cheap then. Muhammad Ali came through to one of our shows one time. It was, we was at the Armory, I think it was like Human Kindness Day, you know. And he came through. We had Brock Peterson was there, and Jesse Jackson, and quite a few other celebrities. And we had the pleasure of playing that show. The first time I ever met Muhammad Ali, you know, he shook our hand, you know, shook all the guys' hand in the band, you know, and that was really a thrill to us. That was in around 1969, I believe it was. 1970.
How about Jimi Hendrix? Did you ever see Hendrix?
No, I never did get the opportunity to see him. But I used to listen to him a lot, and we tried to do a couple of his tunes and fit into our little show, you know. But, you know, it's a great loss. Janis Joplin, those two were two of my favorites, and Frank Zappa, of course.
Frank Zappa did a lot for music. He, I guess, put the Persuasions on the map, as you know, back in the day, back in the 60s. And another friend of yours, Bobby Parker.
Oh, man, he's
doesn't get the credit he's due.
He's got to get the credit. Out of all the musicians that I've been inspired by, out of all the guitar players, from John Lee Hooker to, I'm talking about Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Lightning Hopkins, Howlin' Wolf, Wes Montgomery, and Kenny Burrell, Charlie Chris, and I can just go on, Charlie Bird and all of them. When I first saw Bobby Parker play, I think it was in 1952 at the Howard Theater with Paul Hucklebuck Williams Band. That little man got out there and played that guitar. I said, now, one day when I settle down and get my head together, that's what I want to do. I want to play like him, you know. And I tell him this all the time, you know. Bob and I are very tight. You know? We communicate a lot, and we've done a lot of shows together. But when I first heard him play, that's when I knew. Well, at first I used to play a little bit of piano in church, you know, gospel and stuff. Mostly all I learned to play was gospel tunes on the piano. But when I saw him, that's when I really got serious about playing the guitar.
And he's still around in the Washington area today.
Course.
Go see him if you haven't seen him.
Yes,
he's
I do.
Legendary, just like Chuck. And, of course, if you want more information about where Chuck's playing, you can log on to smoothjazz1059.com or windmeupchuck.com. Is that right?
That's it.
And give the State Theater a call, 703-237-0300, and pick up a couple of tickets and help out these musicians along the Gulf Coast. And over the weeks, we've had in the Emergency Preparedness Committee, we've had in the chairman of the Arlington County Board, and various scientists who have talked about global warming and why the hurricane happened. And I said to them, listen, man, didn't you listen to Robert Johnson back in the 30s when the levee breaks? The music was all about the levees breaking,
Right.
if you think about that. So it definitely was some type of failure to communicate and to get those things fortified. And hopefully, you know, by having this benefit, people are now aware, the nation's aware of New Orleans and the poverty that goes on there, and we'll eradicate poverty like we were trying to do back in the 1960s. And it's due to your efforts and all the musicians who will be there on Thursday night. You want to run down the list of people who will be playing with you, Chuck, at the State Theater on October 27th?
Oh, yes. Well, we're going to have the Nighthawks, the Buck Hill Quartets, and also the Grandsons. And we're going to have Tom Principato. Is that right?
That's right.
And also we're going to have Big Joe and the Dynaflows.
Excellent band. He was in old Fleetwood's band.
Oh, yeah. Old Fleetwood Mac band.
Well, he played at Fleetwood's a lot. Big Joe and the Dynaflows. They were like the house band for a couple of months.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Tommy Lepson.
You want also, Tommy Lepson band, also Rose Tavern, Troubadours, the Junkyard Saints, and Chopped Teeth. Chopped Teeth and the Soul Crackers.
With their tribute to the legendary band. So what a lineup. I mean, you wouldn't be able to see this many musicians play in one place. It would take you a couple of weeks to go out to different venues. So come on out on Thursday night, mark it on your calendar, and you're definitely helping a worthwhile cause because proceeds benefit the displaced musicians all along the Gulf Coast.
About 11 bands, isn't it?
Yeah, 11 bands.
11 bands.
And for $20, you can't beat that. You know that, Chuck.
No, you can't beat that.
What's ahead for Chuck Brown in the days to come?
Well, I've been doing quite a few interviews lately and some photos, and also I'm doing a little bit of voiceovers, and we're working on some more commercials, one for Metro and one for the DC Lotto. And quite a few things been happening, and I've been so honored to be given the National Endowment of the Arts National Fellowship. That was the greatest honor I've ever had in my entire career. And I've had a lot of awards, but that one was top of the line. And there's a lot of things I'm happy about. You know, a lot of things are happening. I'm in the studio trying to finish this one particular album that we're working on now. And after that, we're going to work on some I want to work on some more blues and jazz after we finish this one. And I want to work on another gospel. So I'm still busy.
And I understand you'll have a smooth jazz record coming out soon.
Yes.
Well, we'll have to stay in touch and learn more about that.
All right.